like struggles with friendships and stuff. And at the same time, I was starting to really appreciate people in my life more because when you're like growing up, you start to realize that all the friends in your life are like, you grow apart. And also, like when you are friends, it's important to really cling on to certain people. I was just reflecting on how people will grow apart, but it's important to just cherish them while you have them. And when I wrote the song, I'm pretty sure I had just gotten back from hanging out with someone and I was reflecting on all those things. And it was snowing outside. I think it was like December. And I just sat down and I like wrote the little chord progression. And then I was starting to get like really, I don't know, just cramped up because I was just like, I've been inside for so long. And so I stepped outside and I just looked at the snow and I wrote this line that was, I think it was, I don't know, something about snow, but the rest of the song just developed from there. Yeah.
It's so beautiful. I'm going to let everybody just listen to a little bit of the song here for a second.
Fair friend, the words you say engrave into my brain, and with time they fade but stay when you're by my side lane. And now you know the function of your lungs, and you've used it to put good over lonely funds. 'Cause life is hard as shit, but you're one to commit. And when you step to the sky, the snow, the everlasting wit, 'cause you know the function of your lungs. And these moments, they build something louder than old snare drums. And when you're older and you don't know what's next by your school, with your hair getting wet 'cause the rain's pouring down in the middle of town, and I know I'm a soul you'll forget. Fair friend, I love to love, can feel my fragile tears.
Fair Friend. What a beautiful song. When I was listening to it, I just felt this sense of optimism. I don't know why, but it just made me really feel happy. Everything is okay. But I just felt like when you have real friends, everything else is okay. Thank you for that.
Actually, when I first recorded it, it was like for a certain friend that I grew apart from. So then when we re-recorded the vocals, I was thinking about the new friends that I had in my life. And I just felt so happy and I felt like so much love. And I was like smiling the whole time I was recording it. So I'm really happy that like the optimism, like you felt that.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'm curious, what is your process for composing songs? Do you, for example, do the lyrics come first, or do you like come up with a chord progression first, or does it change? What instruments do you use when you write?
It's generally a very emotional process. I feel like most of my songs come out of a really emotional place. I'll be going through something and then I just pick up my guitar or my piano and I just play a chord progression and I think to myself, does this sound like how I feel? Then I'll just play those chords over and over again if I resonate with them emotionally, and I'll just start to hum along to them, and then I'll just like basically improvise by singing whatever I'm feeling in lyrics. So it's really just like the chords first and then the lyrics, but yeah, it's like a very therapeutic process.
Amazing. And what was the first instrument or the first musical, like the genesis of your musical training? Would you like to share anything about that arc of how you became a musician?
I started writing songs on my voice memos app when I was like 6, but they weren't actual traditional songs because I didn't know anything about song structure. And then a few years later, when I was like 10, I got really into trying to figure out how to actually write with a verse, a pre-chorus, a chorus, like ABAB structure, whatever. And then I picked up the ukulele and I learned my first chords and I was so excited. Like I wrote so many songs because I was like, wait, I can add chords to whatever I'm doing. And it was literally like the happiest I had ever felt because all like my entire life I had been searching for what my passion was, and it just clicked when I really started to like write songs with chords. And then I got into guitar and I picked it up really quickly because I had gotten so used to chords on the uke that it was just really easy to like get all the basic chords on guitar, right? Yeah, and then I got into piano. I started taking lessons at Mark Murphy's. I thought piano was a lot easier in terms of the different chords and stuff. And I've been writing songs on piano and guitar now ever since. I've been in uke because that was like my beginner thing. But
and also in Logic Pro.
Oh yeah, and I've been trying to figure out Logic. I started with BandLab, a program that's more like recording for beginners, and then he got me my own studio for a birthday present.
We converted a room in the house to a studio that wasn't being used. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I got a little home studio and I started using Logic Pro to record music. And yeah.
Incredible. I wonder if you'd be willing to tell us about one of the other songs on the record, anyone that you'd like to tell us about.
For sure. My favorite song on the album is definitely Living because it's the most emotional for me. All of the songs on the album are about relationships and different people in my life just because, I don't know, just I had been going through a lot with different people at the time, and it was my main source of inspiration, and it definitely will be for all my future projects. But Living in particular, I think that it really replicates how my head sounded. It really captured a certain feeling. And when I recorded it, it was actually the only song that we recorded the vocals in one take for. We even got a new mic. But we kept
like afterwards.
Yeah, we got a new mic. And we re-recorded
14. Yeah,
we re-recorded the vocals for all the other tracks on the album except for Living, because that one take where I sang the vocals was just so like emotional for me. I literally like, if you listen really closely, you'll hear that I have my voice is on the verge of tears, because I was just so emotional. I was thinking about a friendship I've been going through, and I was just thinking about how you can have these really toxic friendships or relationships or whatever, and they can end and it sucks. But at the same time, despite a bunch of anger towards specific people, you still are only left really remembering the good memories or living with them. So yeah, that song is just really emotional to me and important.
Thank you. Let's listen to a little bit of Living.
Moments I ponder the life we lived, though I don't know if I should. You held the lock and I didn't feel love. I just felt like you understood. Living with me.
Wonderful. So one of these pivotal moments, it sounds like for you, son, if I understood you correctly, was that when you were maybe 10 or so, you started to pick up an instrument and add chords to the lyrics that you had been writing before and maybe melodies. Is that true? Did I get that right?
Yes, yeah. So yeah, I just picked it up and I was like, oh my God, I can actually bring my songs to life in a new way. And also, most of my songs at the time on uke were like not what you would traditionally call very good because I was very new to it. But he saw so much potential in them. My dad, he was like, oh my God, like we could record this, we could make this into an album. And I was like in shock because he knows all the music theory, whatever, but he still saw potential in it. Yeah.
So it was in part because of your dad's encouragement that you were like, okay, I guess I'll try it. If he says that this is worth doing, then okay. That was
for sure. I think I really believe that I would have continued doing really bad songs, but I think I would have been a lot more anxious about them without his encouragement and without him being like able to help me record the album. I don't think it definitely couldn't have been as good as it is now. Yeah.
What did it look like when your dad would help out with your composition, or maybe the composition happened in the studio? I'm not sure. I'm just curious if you would be willing to share more about how your dad helped or how he encouraged or whatever.
I would usually write the song, then I'd show it to him, and then he would be really inspired and be like, we have to record this. And so we'd stay in the studio for a really long time. And basically, he got the whole setup together. We would record a bunch of different tracks, and we spent a really long time on like background vocals and stuff. I gave him a bunch of different ideas, and then he would record them on the keyboard. And then later on, we started using this service called Musiversal. Would you want to talk about
well, I use some of the same musicians on my album as on her album. It's the service, I don't know if you're familiar with it, Chris, where you pay a relatively low monthly fee of about $199. And you can record with supposedly unlimited session musicians from around the world. And in reality, you can usually fit in about 8 per month if you're really aggressive about it. And that's basically what I did. So over about 4 or 5 months, I basically did about 50 overdubs, most of them for her album, and then also a few of them for the tracks that I didn't record live for my own album. So we had musicians from Ireland and the Czech Republic and Puerto Rico and just everywhere from all over the world on her album. Other than when I've contributed myself on virtual instruments or on piano, it's mostly all live session musicians, plus herself on the vocals.
I feel like I was very particular about everything. Like I was like, oh, this track needs to have horns, or this track needs to have like strings. And I feel like it was a little annoying at times because I was like, no, we have to like re-record that, or it doesn't feel like it's on time. So it was just a lot of like me being very like picky about certain things.
Right.
But he was always very accommodating for everything. And he brought up a lot of ideas that were like really helpful, specifically on tracks like Allegorica.
Yeah, that one we basically built from the ground up. There were no Musiversal artists on it. So basically we just did everything ourselves. And we were actually at a cottage in Canada that we rented out for July, where I wanted to finish my own album. We were trying to desperately finish hers and also have a bit of a vacation in Canada. And so we were literally just we took a dog bowl at one point and reversed it to make it into kind of a cool backward sound.
Yeah, because we didn't have a lot of instruments because we were in the cottage. So we were just, it needs something.
Yeah, and then you did a ridiculous amount of background vocals.
Okay, the background vocals took forever.
Yeah.
Actually, on the whole album, like we just spent, like I feel like one of the most difficult parts for me was the background vocals, because you always have to like double each background vocal. So if I was singing like a high part, I would have to sing it twice, and then the middle part I have to sing it twice, and the low part, and then I'd have to redo it for a bunch of different parts of the song. So
but she was always alluding to her standards were very high the entire time. She really did have like the final sign off. We basically said we were co-producers because I was doing arrangements. As a parent who is already a musician, it can be very hard to figure out where the balance is between encouraging or intimidating. And I think with my son, for example, I pushed him a little too hard. He expressed an interest in playing the drums at one point, and I was like, oh, well, let me build you a drum room and let's do it. And then he just totally stopped playing the drums. Oh man, I went too far. And then with son was the opposite. I was like, I totally went in the wrong direction. Like she expressed tremendous interest in singing early on, and I was vaguely, I don't know if you can really do it. And she burst into tears. It was just like the total worst moment of my life of a parent. And she's since just been surprising me at every turn, every aspect of this album. She's been so perfectionistic about it. She insisted on it being professionally mastered. And we got a guy that I've used with my own recordings in the past. She wanted a graphic designer, and I was like, I could just take it. And I thought about it, and no, now it does in fact look much better. So she's been, pushing, like totally pushing me the whole time, and just because as she should, because she has tremendous ears, and she's been teaching herself and improving so much in this impressive way. And even just her playlists and the amount of just songs that she hasn't even recorded yet that she's already written. There's just so much going on there that I'm starting to no longer be surprised at how much she's able to achieve. So it's all been very impressive to me as a father to just watch this progress.
No, that's great. Thank you for sharing that, because that's part of what I hope to share with listeners who might be parents and might be thinking how, as parents, how can they support their kids and what to do and what not to do. I really appreciate your sharing that. As a parent, it's like we're always trying to get it right. And I'm curious, son, what do you think that your mom or dad got right or maybe didn't get right?
I think I've identified the wrong moment for sure. Yeah.
I think it's always just been great to have the support from my dad, because he is a musician, and it's like my thought process is I feel like I'm gonna be a musician no matter what. And I really I've always thought to myself, like, I want my musical career to start now,
Wow.
So it's like I have the asset of my dad who is like in the industry, and it's just like a really big privilege. Like, obviously he was against getting stuff like a master or like a graphic designer at first, but at the end of the day, he still knew people who did that, and that was like really helpful. And also just I've played him so many of my songs, and he always sees stuff in them. As I was saying before, no matter what I play, he always sees a lot in them. And I think it's because he's a composer and he gets so many commissions to write stuff based off of things that are already really simple. And so he really sees stuff in even like the most simple things that I've written. And and he's always been there to teach me. Like, he is a music professor at 3 colleges. So whenever I ask him for help with a music theory assignment or learning piano for a recital, he's genuinely been such an amazing teacher, and he's just been available to help me when I need it. And I couldn't ask for another parent to teach me anything. And also, my mother is always so proud of me. Like, if I play anything at all, she's, oh my God, that's amazing. Even if I think it's not that amazing, she's, wow, I can't believe you did this.
And she'll burst into tears. Yes.
Yeah, she's a very emotional. But I just feel like I have 2 people who are very supportive and proud.
And your brother too.
Yeah, my brother too. He's been helpful with like just being there to listen to my songs and then give honest opinions and stuff. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. If I can just share what comes up for me around it, one of the things I think is really interesting is the fact that, from your parents, you weren't necessarily pushed or put into instrumental music lessons from an early age. But nonetheless, you had this passion for it and have turned into just a fabulous songwriter, composer, producer. And even with, it sounds like the main things that helped that you're talking about is just encouragement, really, and just general support. And they also gave you access to the ukulele and guitar lessons, which in and of themselves were enough to fill in the missing pieces for you. Am I getting that kind of right?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I've always had this sort of mindset. It's weird, of just, I want to do things for myself. Like, I remember I used to like do some art classes here and there, and they were just like, you should be an artist, or like, you are going to be an artist. And I think that was like, they learned from that, because right after they said that, I just stopped like drawing and stuff. And I think it was a little different than other kids who might have been more pushed because of that. I was always like, don't say that, because now it feels like I'm not really doing it for myself. But with music, I always just felt such a calling toward it. And I feel like nothing could have got in the way of that. And they just, it's not that they said, oh, since you're doing music, you have to get lessons. It was always like me who was the person who was like, can I please get lessons? Can I please get lessons?
We learned our lesson for sure.
But
not to push. And my parents were like that too with me. They nurtured whatever interest we expressed, and it happened to be music in my case. And it was also football and basketball and many things. And whatever it was, they were there to support us. So that was the attitude we learned finally to adopt with our kids.
And I love that. And as a classically trained violinist from an early age, I think it's probably a lot of my audience members are also perhaps some of them were trained classically, but some of them started even in their 40s or 50s or whatever. And I just think it's really interesting to hear diverse stories of how people can find their way into their expression as a musician. That's part of why I love this story. But Son, thank you for sharing. I wonder if I can, first of all, I want to make sure people know they can find you on Spotify, Apple Music at Son Jackson, and that is S-U-N, like the sun in the sky.
Right. That's Son Jackson Music, or at Son Jackson Music. Oh, on Instagram.
On Instagram, it's Son Jackson Music.
Yeah. But yes, the album is streaming everywhere.
Yes, YouTube, Amazon, Spotify, Apple Music, everywhere. So yeah.
And is there anything else you'd like for me to let people know?
I don't think so.
No, we're going to start working on her second album any day now. Actually, she's already got a lot of songs in the can.
I have written thousands of songs, and I have them all in my voice memos app. And so I have a lot of stuff for future albums.
Wow.
It's basically all I do in my free time. So, yeah, I have a bunch of songs in line for the next project, which is going to be about facing different things in adolescence and getting older and stuff like that. So, yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. We'll probably rejoin Musiversal and do a whole bunch of overdubs again. It'll be fun. And possibly for my stuff too. Yeah.
If you need a string player on your next,
totally. That too. Yes,
you know, I could bid for the job. Maybe
that's true. What do you think about it? Yeah, it is just overdubs.
Most of the songs on the next album are going to be a lot like Fair Friend, in that I think they're all going to be guitar based, because I wrote all the songs strictly on guitar, a few on piano, but so they're all going to have a lot of like strings and stuff. So yeah.
Yes.
And also Camille, my oldest child in New York City, not too far from you, whether maybe even me and Camille could both contribute strings on.
That would be cool. And you remember, of course, she is in fact on my album. I don't know if you're an aspiring camera person, but she took all the photos that are for the packaging of my own CD. And she also did a lot of filming of me for the videos that I've been releasing, including of the string quartet and so on. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's a great. Thank you, Son, for sharing that. And I would love to ask your dad some questions if it's all right with you. And you're, of course, welcome to chime in and correct him for the record.
Yes.
So, Dee, Dad.
Yes.
I wonder, what have been some of the lessons that you've learned? I guess we talked about some of the lessons that you've learned about encouraging your child.
Yeah, finding the right balance, really.
Finding the right balance.
Whether to push or whether to just take your cues from the child's interests, which is really what I learned ultimately.
Yeah,
the latter more than the former.
And also, for people that don't know, you and I are longtime friends. And
yeah, man.
Of course, I'm indebted to you for having brought me to work on some of your albums early on, several of your albums, which was pivotal for my career, being able to meet people in New York City. And so many great musical lessons that I got from working with you as a jazz musician. And you had this tremendous career as a jazz pianist and composer when I first knew you. And that was over 25 years ago, or
it was a while ago. Yes.
Yeah. And so then you pivoted while you were a parent in different ways, obviously getting Emmys and writing for children's television and teaching in colleges and things like this. And without going through the entire thing, I'm just curious if you can tell us about how being a parent has affected that trajectory. And especially now that it seems you're pivoting again and returning somewhat to your original identity, I guess, as a composer and a performer, albeit with new surprises and everything.
Yeah, you're always reflecting in your music what you've lived through, and certainly being a parent has been a large part of that. But there was also a practical consideration. I really pivoted away when I wanted to just, first and foremost, be in one place at a time instead of traveling around the world as I was doing a lot of. So literally after my last album came out, before Poetry Project, my last truly jazz album, I've done some movie soundtrack albums since then and a lot of TV songs and things like that. But the last real jazz album, Serenity Song, which you were actually on, Chris, of course, on pieces like Lushly and things like that. That was right around when Jarrett was born, our first son. And then followed my first child. You could edit that out. Followed a couple of years later by my son here. My son followed by son. And so I wanted to be in one place. And I had this nascent interest in music technology really my entire life. But it had really gotten to a point around that time where I could literally have what you would call orchestra in a box or something, like where you could just sit at a computer and just have every sound at your disposal and create any kind of music you could imagine. And so I just got very involved in that. And to make a long story short, it did indeed lead to this career where I was just sitting at home writing music and really enjoying myself. And the interesting thing about it in terms of the parent thing is that, I had a sort of jazz fans or whatever, as you certainly have as well. The fans became them, right? So I started writing for children's shows, and they became my fans. In fact, they even sang on some of the songs. I wrote a song for Marvy's song for Sesame Street that has 5 million views or something, and they're singing the background vocals on that song.
Your kids are.
Yes, yeah.
Your kids became your fans, and you started writing for your fans, which were your kids.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I would test everything out on them. They would hear stuff that would be heard by millions of kids later. They were always the first people to hear everything I wrote. Yeah.
So it wasn't just only about like making a sacrifice to be a dad and giving
no.
music. It was more like, wait, let me bring my music and integrate it and synergize it with these other things that I'm passionate about, which is my kids.
Exactly. Yeah. And also people have often been very weird, or not weird, surprised, I guess you'd say, about this seeming 180-degree pivot from even more avant-garde jazz at times and as more out there stuff to children's music. It's you must have sold out and so on. And people don't realize that there's always been this sort of melodic thread. I think you would realize it, Chris, in everything that I've ever written. It was an incredibly organic, natural step. And in fact, a lot of the children's shows we wrote, for example, The Wonder Pets is an excellent example. In fact, I wrote a couple of episodes for the new Wonder Pets, which I can finally tell people about. It's been in the can for 2 years, the show as a whole, that'll be coming out on Nickelodeon and Apple TV. And they just announced it finally recently. But that show, especially, it's every episode they would ask you to write in some new style. And as a jazz musician who was trained, as we all are, in just being able to turn on a dime and embrace the moment, you would just do this deep dive into noir folk music or film noir or hip hop or whatever, and really get inside of it and make it your own in a matter of days. And 3 weeks later, have a finished product of the underscore and the songs for an entire episode. They would provide the words, but you would do the songs, the music for the songs. So yeah, it was very similar. It was almost like a slow motion version of what I do when I perform as a jazz musician. I didn't expect to do it quite as long as I've done. And admittedly, of late, I've been starting to say no more and more as I've been pivoting, as you say, back to my jazz career and continuing to teach as well, which I very much enjoy doing. But yeah, there was more similarities to it than I think people probably realized from the outside.
Well, it's also heartening for me because I see some parallels in my own trajectory along with yours in as much as I used to identify much more as a performer and a touring artist, and now it's taken more of a shape as a teacher. But I actually get a lot of creative energy from not only from what I'm teaching, but I try to bring my musical creative energy to teaching. So I'll perform for students and make a lot of materials that requires that creativity.
Teaching's the same way. Teaching is like a performance in a certain way. I mean, you're being sincere, of course, you're being yourself, but so are you when you perform a jazz solo or something. So I get a certain kind of a natural high from doing that as well. And love sharing information with students. And I learn a lot. It's a cliche, but it's true. You learn a lot from the students. It's almost a two-way street. I get a real kick out of that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And in my case, I started making these play along videos, which is basically like I've made hundreds of them. And the whole concept behind it is that I create my own loops and then I play lines and then I invite students to play the lines back.
Very nice. Yeah.
A different way to teach string players. And so that actually requires me to be creating on the instrument. I have one final question for you.
Yes.
What I'm saying is, what's different about you now as a musician that you've gone through this parenting, that you are towards the final lap of your parenting phase, and how do you envision your lifestyle in the future as a musician now that you're getting to a new stage in a few years, maybe when your kids are out of the house?
Yeah, I will say that now our first son, I keep saying our first son. It's so confusing. Our meaning my wife, who's in the other room there, Elizabeth Jarrett, our firstborn, is currently at Rutgers. He's studying film at the Mason Gross School of the Arts. So he's now flown the coop. He's away. He's admittedly just down the street, but he's basically away and on campus. And son is, of course, she's currently in the 10th grade. I almost forgot, which is a little scary. And so they're on their way to college. And so, yes, mentally speaking, we've gone through a period where, as I say, they were my number one fans when I was doing this children's stuff. Now they're aged out of that. And I find myself increasingly drawn back to, especially in the post-pandemic age where we were all cooped up and not able to get in front of an audience. I really miss that opportunity to get in front of an audience. And I would like to pivot back to doing more live performance. So I would say, the next phase of my focus, in addition to, of course, continuing to teach, because I'm teaching it actually at NYU right now, media scoring, and LIU Brooklyn at their honors college in part, and the Jay-Z school, the Rock Nation school, and the Fierstein Graduate School of Cinema at Brooklyn College. So I'm doing all of this teaching, which I quite enjoy as well, but it's part-time unless you add it up, and then it's almost a full-time gig. But yeah, so I enjoy teaching, but I would like to get back on the road and play as much as possible. And also, I'm starting to sing. I have no aspirations to be a singer or a crooner or something, but I just wanted to mention that because after years of doing demo tapes for these children's shows and singing for my kids and so on, it creeped into the new album. So there's a couple of tracks on it.
I've been his teacher.
And she's been my teacher. She's been giving me vocal, like singing lessons, because she's such a well-trained vocalist herself throughout everything that she's been taught. And so, yeah, so I'm starting to throw that in too. So I'm doing a lot more song-oriented things of late, of course, with Poetry Project being one of them. My wife pointed out that it's called Poetry Project, so people might think it's just poetry, but it's actually my original songs written to the poetry of a diversity of Canadian poets. And I've already written about 9 new songs for a follow-up project. And I'm going to be going to Halifax to perform those songs. They have more of a spiritual orientation and so on. So it'll be interesting, written by many African Canadian poets mostly.
Yeah, we're just always writing music in this house.
Yeah, basically. So we're gearing up to do another round of maybe Musiversal, and I'll try to apply for some grants and so on. So I foresee that being the next phase to get back on the horse a little bit more in terms of a live performance thing and writing more and playing more.
That's beautiful. I can say now confidently that retroactively, we will have been listening to music from your record throughout this podcast as well. And as we roll out of here, we are listening to music by Dee Dee Jackson, and also have been listening to music by his daughter, Son Jackson. And if you want to find Dee Dee's music, that is D Jackson. And you can probably go to ddjackson.com. I'm sure you can find, there's like multiple albums, maybe 20 or something like at least.
Yeah, there's a bunch, maybe about 14 as a leader or co-leader. But for this new one, Poetry Project, if you go to ddjackson.bandcamp.com, somebody out there, I encourage, buy the physical thing. Get the digital, there's a booklet, a 32-page color booklet. Nobody buys albums anymore, I know. But I'm very proud of this booklet that Son actually did a lot of the photos, or did all the photos for. Some liner notes, the original reprints of the poetry and so on. So that's all available at ddjackson.bandcamp.com with a lot of extra bonus options and so on as well. But of course, yes, you can get it on streaming and Spotify and everything else, like everything else says for sure.
But they can look for ddjackson.com and also look for Son Jackson music wherever you might be. It's totally great, guys. Thank you so much for taking time with me today, and Son, especially for you. Thank you for sharing. But Dee Dee, it's always so great to see you, my friend. Thank you.
You're looking good, man. It's great to see you as well.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been great.
Yeah, absolutely.